Ever get the feeling there's this whole intricate world operating beneath the surface of your everyday thoughts? A hidden engine driving your desires, your fears, those little quirks you can't quite explain.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's dive deep into that fascinating inner landscape today, the unconscious.
And what's truly captivating is how the pioneers of psychology first started trying to, well, understand and map this internal territory. Think about Professor Freud.
Yeah.
His early work on neuroses suggested that many of our anxieties and issues stem from unfulfilled longings and wishes, often of a sexual nature, that we're largely unaware of. It was a really revolutionary idea back then.
And can you imagine the initial reaction to that? I mean, this was pretty groundbreaking, maybe even shocking, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
This notion that these hidden, primarily sexual urges were at the root of our problems, it must have faced a lot of resistance.
Oh, absolutely. Which is understandable, you know. But to truly understand these symptoms, they realized they needed to find ways to bypass these resistances, as they called them, and bring these buried memories and feelings to light. Precisely. And the term unconscious became the label for this realm, like a storage space for emotionally charged experiences that are kept outside of our conscious awareness.
Right.
It's also worth remembering, though, that the term has a broader meaning, too, simply referring to anything we're not actively aware of in any given moment.
Gotcha.
So for our deep dive today, we're venturing into some of the foundational explorations of this unconscious world. We'll be focusing on key excerpts from Carl Jung's Psychology of the Unconscious.
A seminal work.
Yeah. Think of this as your fast track to grasping some of Jung's core early insights. Our mission here is really to extract the most crucial ideas from his work and understand what they mean for us.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, our aim is really to unpack Jung's initial perspectives on the unconscious, his concept of libido, which it has some important differences from Freud's, we should note, and his ideas about the different ways we think.
Right.
We're hoping to reveal some, well, surprising connections to our daily lives, and maybe even to the long history of human thought.
All right, let's jump right in then. One of the most striking themes is the immense power of instinct, particularly what Freud termed the libido. I mean, we see the importance of this fundamental drive, often expressed as love, woven throughout all of human creativity, art, literature, you name it, really, since the very beginning.
And what's insightful here is Freud's understanding of libido as this basic craving and need inherent in all of us. He drew a compelling parallel to the primal urge of hunger.
Like a fundamental energy.
Exactly. This fundamental energy, this life force, it acts as a core motivator for, well, pretty much everything we do.
And it makes sense when you think about it, doesn't it? Consider a child's natural curiosity about their own body and the world around them. Jung touches on how these early explorations are perfectly normal or, unavoidable, really. The crucial thing, it seems, is a healthy development that allows us to move beyond those initial family attachments as we mature and forge our own path.
And this brings up an important point about what can happen when the development gets, well, stuck.
Right.
Both Jung and Freud recognized the potential pitfalls of the libido remaining fixated on those early objects, primarily our parents. This can lead to what Freud described as incestuous bonds, where the emotional and energetic investment remains overwhelmingly tied to the family unit.
And this is where things can get complicated, right? Because as our sexual instincts develop, these incestuous bonds create a conflict with societal rules and, our own internal moral compass.
Exactly. Jung points out that this leads to deeper repression, pushing these unsettling feelings further into the unconscious.
Okay.
And interestingly, as a defense mechanism, people might even develop negative feelings towards their parents to try and compensate for these underlying impossible desires.
Wow. So you push them away consciously because unconsciously there's this pull.
Sort of. Now, this is a key area where Jung's perspective differed quite a bit from Freud's. Well, while Freud often interpreted childhood behaviors through the lens of a developing sexuality that could become, let's say, perverted if fixated, Jung viewed these early expressions more as stepping stones or precursors to later fully formed sexuality.
So not inherently problematic, just early stages.
He saw them as initial expressions, early hints of what would later become sexual. Not the thing itself, just a foreshadowing.
And this difference in perspective led to Jung's concept of life stages, didn't it? He divided human development into 3 broad phases.
Yes, exactly. The first, which Jung called the pre-sexual stage, roughly spans the time up to about age 3 or 4.
Okay.
During this period, Jung believed the libido, or life energy, is primarily directed towards essential biological functions like nutrition and growth. He even used a vivid analogy, comparing this stage to a caterpillar focused solely on eating and developing.
That's a great way to visualize it. So, no hidden perversions lurking in the terrible twos, according to Jung, just basic survival and growth energy.
Pretty much, yeah.
What comes after that?
Well, following this pre-sexual phase, the parents emerge as the primary objects of the child's developing affection, becoming sources of comfort and pleasure. This is where Freud's idea of the nuclear or root complex comes into play.
Right, the idea that early family dynamics shape everything.
Emphasizing how these early parental relationships serve as models for all future relationships. Jung certainly acknowledged the significant influence of parents, but again, this emphasis on them as the sole determining factor in later difficulties was a key point of divergence from Freud's more sexualized interpretation.
Oh, okay, so we've got these powerful unconscious drives, these formative early relationships. Now, Jung also delves into how we actually think about ourselves and our motivations, and how that often doesn't quite align with what's really going on beneath the surface.
Absolutely. There's a common human tendency, isn't there, to judge ourselves and others based on our conscious reasons and stated intentions.
Totally, we say, this is what I want, or this is what I meant to do.
But, as we all know from our own experiences, there's often a real disconnect between what we consciously think and what we actually do. We might intend to say one thing and something completely different comes out.
Oh, definitely. It's that feeling of, wait, that's not what I was trying to say at all.
Right. And Jung highlights another curious phenomenon, intensely desiring something consciously, finally getting it, and then feeling, well, underwhelmed.
Yeah, that emptiness.
It doesn't bring the satisfaction we expected. The desire just seems to shift somewhere else. It makes you wonder, was what you consciously thought you wanted even the real driving force in the first place?
That's a good question.
Exactly. These experiences highlight that there are indeed other directing forces at play, forces operating outside of our conscious awareness. Our conscious desires and intentions, while important, don't always provide the complete picture of our underlying motivations and drives.
This leads to the idea of life as this constant state of flux, right? Always in motion, either building up or breaking down.
Yes, Jung, with his dynamic view of life, emphasizes this continuous movement. He also points out humanity's unique ability, through our intelligence and understanding, to consciously guide this life energy or libido in ways that serve our needs and lead to genuine satisfaction in the present.
But what happens when we get that wrong? When we're unaware of our true needs, or we fail to adapt to the present moment?
That's where Jung introduces the concept of the reanimation of infantile paths.
Okay.
When we're unable to find fulfillment in our current circumstances, maybe because of ignorance or inherent tendencies or just failure to adapt, we might unconsciously revert to those earlier childhood patterns.
Trying to get satisfaction in old ways.
Exactly, attempting to gain fulfillment through symptoms or certain ingrained attitudes. You could see this as a failure to achieve a more mature and stable development, both as individuals and perhaps even, as a species.
It's like our unconscious is saying, well, this worked sort of before, let's try it again, even if it's not really serving us in the long run.
That's a good way to put it. It's a default back to something familiar, even if it's ultimately unhelpful.
Now, with all these different pieces, the unconscious, libido, these hidden drives, Jung was trying to create a comprehensive framework to understand the whole complex business of being human, right? That's where analytic psychology comes in.
Precisely. The aim of analytic psychology, as Jung envisioned it, was to provide a unifying perspective, to bring order to the diverse and seemingly disparate aspects of human experience that have been observed. It's about connecting the dots, really.
So it's about seeing the bigger picture, not just focusing on one isolated symptom or quirk.
Exactly. And at its core, analytic psychology seeks to establish our fundamental biological connection to all living organisms, while also acknowledging the unique achievements of humanity and, importantly, opening up possibilities for growth and improvement in areas like well-being, fulfillment, and overall health.
Okay. Now, Jung also delves into how we think, and he makes a distinction between 2 very different kinds of thinking. This sounds fascinating, especially considering how much we value rational thought.
Indeed. Jung points back to the ancient understanding of dreams. Back then, they were often believed to hold psychological meaning related to, say, wish fulfillment, rather than being literal predictions or reflections of reality.
Right, not fortune telling.
No. Think of a typical dream, the sexual assault. Jung argues this isn't necessarily a memory or a premonition, but rather a symbolic expression of underlying desires or anxieties. It's like our brains speak a different language when we're dreaming, a language of symbols.
And Jung suggests this symbolic thinking isn't just confined to our sleep states.
Not at all. He argues that symbolism subtly permeates our everyday thinking too. But then he draws a clear distinction, defining directed thinking as that focused, deliberate, and verbal mode of thought.
Our logical side.
Yes, our go-to for problem-solving, planning, and logical reasoning. He briefly touches on the evolution of speech, suggesting that directed thinking, this verbal, linear style of thought, is actually a more recent development in our evolutionary history.
So our ancestors likely didn't have internal monologues running constantly like we do?
Probably not in the same way, no.
Wow. So science, with its logical steps and verbal explanations, would be a prime example of directed thinking.
Absolutely. And he even sees the intellectual discipline of scholasticism as a historical precursor to this structured, directed approach.
Okay.
He contrasts this with thinking not directed, often referred to as dream or fantasy thinking, which is thinking in images, much more like how we experience dreams.
Less words, more pictures.
Exactly. It's less structured, more fluid, and relies on visual and emotional associations. This kind of thinking, Jung argues, is how the ancient mind operated primarily, creating mythology rather than science as we know it.
So their world was more subjective.
Yes, theirs was a world built on subjective fantasies, surprisingly similar, he notes, to how children think, and of course the world of dreams.
It's like we've got this ancient imaginative way of thinking running alongside our more modern logical brain power. And Jung saw a deep connection between this fantasy thinking and the creation of myths, right? And ultimately a link back to the unconscious.
Precisely. Jung explores how these fantasies are created, echoing Freud's psychoanalytic insight that we often imagine what we lack.
Like the examples he gives.
Yeah, the person who stutters might dream of being a powerful orator, the poor person of being a millionaire, that kind of thing. While the ultimate reasons behind this are complex, Jung focuses on where these fantasies get their raw material.
Okay.
Think about those common daydreams, like the child who imagines they're secretly of noble birth and will one day be rescued. That sounds like a classic fairy tale, doesn't it?
Totally.
And Jung points out that these modern fantasies are often just echoes of old folk beliefs that were once widely accepted. Ancient heroes like Romulus and Remus or Moses are often depicted as having been separated from their real parents or having divine parentage.
So our personal daydreams often tap into these ancient archetypal narratives.
That's the idea. It's like we're unconsciously replaying these age-old stories in our own minds.
That's wild. It's like we're unconsciously replaying these age-old stories in our own minds. What about the sexual assault dream example we mentioned earlier? How does that connect to mythology?
That, too, Jung argues, is a mythological theme, and in prehistoric times, it was likely also a reality, the capture of women.
Right.
But even in more civilized eras, it remained a subject of myth. Think of the abduction of Proserpina, Europa, or the Sabine women. He even notes that some modern marriage customs still carry echoes of this ancient practice of marriage by capture.
Yeah, remnants.
Yeah, so these powerful primal themes, sex, power, even violence, they don't just disappear from society, they just go underground, influencing our fantasies and dreams.
It's like fantastic thinking is this hidden river that feeds into our conscious thought, connecting us to the deepest layers of the human mind, layers that have been buried for centuries.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And Jung highlights that these products of fantastic thinking arise directly from our consciousness in various forms. Our daydreams, our night dreams with their veiled unconscious content, and even entirely unconscious fantasy systems in what he calls split-off complexes.
Split-off complex.
Yeah, which can sometimes contribute to the development of dissociated aspects of the personality, things walled off from conscious awareness.
This is getting really interesting, that Jung brings in the figure of Faust, this iconic character who is both a creator and a destroyer. What's the significance of Faust in all of this?
Well, Jung sees Faust as a symbolic representation of a fundamental human duality. He references the biblical saying, "I came not to send peace, but a sword," highlighting this inherent tension.
The conflict within.
Exactly. He frames it as the modern problem of choice, the struggle between world renunciation, that's Scylla, and world acceptance, Charybdis.
So this eternal push and pull between denying earthly desires and embracing them. And when traditional ethical stances fail to provide answers, where does the unconscious turn?
Well, Jung suggests that when established ethical poses, like the kind of thing expressed in the hymn of creation, no longer resonate, the unconscious projects a new attempt at understanding. He sees this embodied in the moth song.
The moth song.
Yeah, this choice, like Faust's, represents a new direction. The longing for the sun in the moth song, which Jung equates with the longing for God, is the same passionate yearning we might feel for something else entirely, like, say, a ship's officer in Ms. Miller's case.
The object changes, but the energy is the same.
That's the key insight here. Our deepest drives can be both creative and self-destructive. Attention Jung saw as fundamental to the human experience. It's not necessarily about the specific object of desire, but the longing itself.
That's the key insight here. Our deepest drives can be both creative and self-destructive. Attention Jung saw as fundamental to the human experience. It's not necessarily about the specific object of desire, but the longing itself.
Exactly. Jung emphasizes that the longing itself is psychologically significant. He even posits that, psychologically speaking, God can be seen as our own deepest longings, projected outward, something we then pay divine honors to.
That's a powerful idea, that our concept of the divine is intertwined with our own deepest yearnings. Now, what happens when we have to give up an important object of our libido?
Well, Jung explains that if a surrendered libido object isn't replaced by genuine compensation, it can lead to a regression.
Going backwards.
Yeah, a regression to an earlier discarded object, a return to the infantile. We might then unconsciously use the parent image as a substitute, making it synonymous with powerful symbols like God, the sun, or fire.
Ah, okay.
These symbols, like the sun and the snake, then become containers for the gathered libido. It's like our emotional energy gets bundled up and attached to these primal images.
And the moth and sun imagery you said, that takes us to some deep historical levels of the soul.
Yes. Jung sees the sun hero archetype as both creative and destructive. The moth drawn to the flame, right? Burning its wings in its pursuit of light. This destructiveness, inherent in being fruitful, can lead the neurotic, Jung suggests, to withdraw from the conflicts of life, engaging in a kind of self-murder to avoid the pain.
So this inward turning, this withdrawal, that sounds like introversion. And Jung saw the hero figure as having origins in the unconscious itself.
Precisely. Jung views introversion as a turning back towards the mother of humanity, which he equates with the unconscious.
The collective source.
Kind of. He discusses the forward and backward flow of the libido and the abnormal third, those who get stuck in this inward turning. He connects conflict often to the incest problem and the archetype of the terrible mother.
The terrible mother.
Yeah, that potentially engulfing and destructive aspect of the maternal figure. Think of it not just as a literally bad mother, but as the overwhelming, potentially consuming aspect, representing our fears of dependence and being, well, swallowed up by others or our own unconscious.
Okay. And he uses Miss Miller's experience of introversion as an example, leading to her hypnagogic visions and poems.
Yes. Highlighting the internal conflict and its creative output, Jung emphasizes the uniformity of the unconscious across all individuals, asserting that it is the true object of psychology.
Right.
He sees the individual tendency towards the hero cult, that fascination with idealized figures, as a form of love for the unconscious, a turning back to the mother of humanity. While regressions can be problematic, Jung notes that within limits they can actually be favorable for psychological well-being.
Miss Miller also mentioned the Sphinx and Aztec figures. How do these fit into this idea of the unconscious origin of the hero?
Jung interprets these figures as theriomorphic representations of the libido, part human, part animal, often tending to represent the parental figures.
Like the Sphinx.
Exactly. The Sphinx, with its riddles and dangerous nature, embodies the fear of the mother. He analyzes the Aztec figure Chihuahua and the symbolic significance of its hand. Jung noticed that both in ancient myths and our dreams, these primal urges often appear as combinations of human and animal figures, like the Sphinx part woman, part lion. He even connects the anal region with veneration, explaining seemingly strange associations where highly valued objects might be unconsciously linked to this area, drawing examples from historical figures and cultural beliefs.
That's a surprising connection. So these seemingly random symbols can hold deep, unconscious meaning related to value and maybe even childhood associations.
Absolutely. He draws parallels between Chihuahua and other wandering hero figures like Ahasver, the Wandering Jew, and Cheddar, highlighting the recurring motif of heroes generating themselves through their own mothers.
Self-creation.
Yeah, an analogy he connects to the setting and rising sun, seen in figures like Mithra and Christ. He also introduces the fish symbol and the two dataphors from Mithraic tradition, representing the mortal and immortal aspects.
And the Trinity, he even connects that to phallic symbolism. That seems quite provocative.
It is, yes, analyzing how libido symbolism ultimately leads back to the theme of mother incest. He concludes this section by stating that the hero myth, in its essence, is the myth of our own suffering unconscious, our own personal Faustian bargain, if you will.
This is a lot to take in, but incredibly thought-provoking. Now, Jung quotes Ferrero on the importance of theory in science, even if it's not perfectly correct. Why does he bring this up here?
Well, Jung includes this quote to emphasize the crucial role of theory in advancing scientific understanding. Even a partially flawed theory can be incredibly useful.
How so?
By shedding light on previously unobserved phenomena, prompting new lines of inquiry, and driving more extensive research. It's about the process,
Yeah.
exploration and refinement, even if the initial map isn't entirely accurate.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a tool for progress.
Exactly. And then he moves on to Freud's interpretation of the dream and the Oedipus complex.
Yeah.
That sounds like a pivotal point.
It really was. Jung highlights the profound impact of Freud's work, particularly its connection of the incest fantasy to the powerful ancient dramatic material of the Oedipus legend. He uses this vivid analogy like encountering an ancient relic in the midst of a modern street to illustrate the feeling of suddenly encountering deep historical themes within the individual psyche. It's a glimpse into a larger, timeless human experience.
That's a powerful image. It's like these ancient stories are still living within us, just beneath the surface.
Exactly. And Jung mentions that this connection extends beyond just the Oedipus complex.
Yes. He points to the far-reaching analogy between the psychological structure of these historical relics, myths, legends, and the structure of recent individual psychological products,
Yeah.
especially in the realm of symbolism. He cites the work of others like Ricklin, Rank, Mater, and Abraham in illuminating these connections.
So patterns repeat.
He also notes the parallels in the individual mechanisms of unconscious work, things like repression and condensation.
Now, Jung also touches on the limitations of our thinking that are imposed by language itself. That's a fascinating idea.
Yeah, he discusses Baldwin's emphasis on how language shapes and restricts our thought processes. Then he introduces Mothner's even more radical view that thinking is essentially just internal speech.
Wow, just talking to ourselves.
Basically. While Baldwin is more cautious, Jung notes his underlying belief in the primacy of this directed thinking, or thinking in internal speech, as the driving force behind culture, responsible for modern empiricism and technology.
So our ability to put thoughts into words has been key to our cultural and technological advancement.
Exactly. And this leads to the historical question of why ancient civilizations, despite their impressive knowledge in math and art, didn't develop modern technology.
Right, what held them back?
Jung suggests that a key factor was a lack of training in this directed thinking, along with an inability to fully detach their libido from other natural relationships, leading to anthropomorphism projecting human qualities onto everything.
Seeing the world as alive with spirits and intentions.
Precisely. He concludes that the development of culture hinges on the mobility and transference of the libido, suggesting directed thinking is a relatively recent acquisition in human history.
That's a mind-blowing thought that the way we consciously think is a fairly new development that unlocked a whole new level of cultural progress. Now, shifting back to mythology, Jung proposes that the ancients invested a lot of the energy and interest that we now pour into science and technology into their myths.
Precisely. This helps explain the seemingly bewildering changes and transformations within, say, Grecian myths. Jung argues that these myths weren't primarily concerned with objective reality.
They weren't trying to be scientifically accurate.
No, not at all. They rather flowed from an inner source of fantasies, constantly adapting and reshaping themselves according to subjective expectations and aesthetic needs.
So their worldview was much more shaped by their internal imaginative landscape than by a cold, objective analysis of the external world.
Absolutely. He contrasts the ancient worldview, where the sun was a father figure and the moon a mother, with a world populated by demons with the more detached and, well, disillusioned perspective brought about by figures like Bruno and Kepler. He emphasizes that the ancient idea of the universe was one that corresponded entirely to their subjective fantasies.
And dreams, according to Freud, offer a similar window into this subjective, non-reality-bound way of thinking.
Yes, Freud saw dreams as unconcerned with the actual state of things, bringing together disparate elements and creating a world of impossibilities.
Makes sense.
He contrasted waking thought, which moves progressively from perception to action, with dream thought, which he described as a regression.
Going backward again.
Right, a regression from the preconscious or unconscious back towards raw memory material, even reanimating infantile memories, what he termed historical regression. In this view, the dream can be seen as a substitute for an infantile scene, transformed into a more recent one through transference.
Let's circle back to the Song of the Moth for a deeper dive. Miss Miller connected her poem to a philosophical work about the shared longing of the moth for the star and man for God, and also a play called La Mythe et la Flamme. What's the psychological significance Jung sees in this connection?
Well, Jung sees this as confirmation of the unconscious mind drawing on existing representations and emotional experiences. He explains the psychological view of God as a representation complex built around a strong feeling, which he equates with libido.
So the feeling gives it power.
Exactly. It's the feeling that gives the complex its power and reality. Honoring God, the sun, or fire in this sense becomes a way of honoring one's own vital force, one's own libido. As Seneca wisely noted, God is near you, he is with you, in you.
So religion in this light becomes this elaborate interplay, a dialogue with our own energy.
In a way, yes. Jung describes it as a marvelous play with oneself, seemingly absurd perhaps, yet profoundly purposeful. Bearing a God within signifies a sense of inner power, even omnipotence.
And he sees this elsewhere.
Yes, he finds traces of this psychology in Christian becoming one with God, mysteries, and clear examples in initiatory rites of cults like Isis, where the initiate was even crowned and worshipped as Helios, the sun god.
Wow.
The extensive light and fire attributes in the Mithraic liturgy further illustrate this inexhaustible association, mirroring the extravagant language of love in medieval mystics.
It's like these grand religious and mystical traditions are, at their core, expressions of this fundamental human desire and inner energy. Now, you mentioned that varied libido symbols can be reduced to a simple root. How does that work?
Jung explains that comparisons, whether analogous or causative, open the door for symbolic expression. He asserts that the vast array of libido symbols can ultimately be traced back to the fundamental concept of libido itself and its basic, primitive qualities.
So finding the common thread.
Exactly. This psychological drive towards simplification and unification mirrors the historical efforts of civilizations to syncretize their many gods, to bring them under a single, more unified divine umbrella. Like the ancient Egyptian identification of various local gods with the sun god Re.
That makes sense, a universal human tendency to find underlying unity in the apparent multiplicity. Now, let's revisit introversion and the flow of libido. You mentioned it's often rooted in the incest problem and the terrible mother archetype. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, introversion, as we discussed, involves a backward flow of the libido, an inward turning. Jung sees conflict, often stemming from the unresolved issues around incestuous desires and the potentially overwhelming aspects of the maternal figure, the terrible mother, as a significant cause of this inward direction.
Right.
He revisits Miss Miller's intense emotional reaction to the article on spontaneous object creation as a moment of significant psychological stirring, potentially marking the beginning of a sublimated life aim for her.
And he even analyzes Poe's The Raven through this lens. That seems quite specific.
Yes. Interpreting the spectral raven as a symbolic representation of tormenting memories and the inexorable nevermore of the past. He also analyzes God's speech to Job about Behemoth and Leviathan.
Those giant creatures.
Right, seeing these creatures as representing the untamable wildness and overwhelming power of nature's unchained forces, analogous to the raw power of the libido.
It's like these literary and biblical images are also tapping into these deep unconscious energies. Now, Jung talks about the ancient anticipation for a holy man or Messiah. How does that connect to all of this?
Jung discusses the historical longing for a figure who could provide spiritual guidance and a deeper understanding of the divine. He sees the emergence of the Logos become flesh and the founding of Christianity as fulfilling this fundamental need.
A need for meaning and connection.
Exactly, a new fellowship based on love and brotherhood. He emphasizes this as a significant step forward for humanity, driven by a basic human need in the masses, rather than complex philosophical theories.
So these religious movements weren't just abstract ideas, they were addressing deep-seated psychological needs.
Absolutely. Jung argues that the core meaning of both Christianity and Mithricism lies in a moral restraint of animal impulses. The initial fervor of these religions stemmed from a profound feeling of redemption.
Which maybe we've lost touch with.
Well, Jung suggests that modern, more civilized people, now often merely neurotic, struggle to fully appreciate that because the context of ancient brutality and the raw power of the unchained libido are no longer readily apparent.
Right.
He even suggests that for some enlightened individuals, religiousness can border on neurosis, and that Christianity's success in repressing elementary emotions has ironically led to a kind of hollowness in belief for some.
It's like we've become so good at suppressing these primal urges that the very religions that helped us do so now feel distant and less meaningful. Now, Jung quotes Seneca again on the indwelling Holy Spirit. What's the significance of this?
Jung uses Seneca's words to highlight the difficulty in truly articulating the nature of the divine, often requiring, parabolic language. Seneca speaks of a Holy Spirit residing within us.
An inner guide.
Yeah, an observer of good and evil, a constant guardian, emphasizing the idea that God is near within and that good individuals carry this divine presence within them, inspiring upright thoughts.
So the divine isn't just some far-off entity, but something intimately connected to our own inner being. And Jung notes a shift in focus, similar to Faust, from this religious world towards the sun of this world. What does that symbolize?
This shift represents a turning of attention towards earthly existence and its inherent energies, symbolized powerfully by the sun. He reiterates the image of the moth fluttering around the light and ultimately burning its wings as a key motif in this transition.
And the sun itself holds a lot of symbolic weight, doesn't it? More than just light and heat.
Oh, indeed. Jung explains the ancient comparison of the sun to the phallus in the heavens, the source of light, life-giving warmth, and a powerful attractor of the libido. He mentions ancient sun worship, like Sol Invictus and Mithra, and connects the sun's journey through the zodiac to the path of human life. Scriptural references equating God with fire and light, as well as the Hindu concept of Agni as sacrificial flame, sacrificer, and sacrificed paralleling Christ, further illustrate this profound symbolism.
And Soma in Hindu texts.
Yes, he even delves into Hindu literature, identifying Soma and fire as identical, and rediscovering Soma as a libido symbol, with its Vedic definition as seminal fluid, confirming this for him.
So this solar imagery connects to both our life force and our creative, procreative energies. And this might explain why so many gods were either sexually defined or associated with being devoured.
Exactly. The libido's potential retreat to the pre-sexual stage, whereas partly nutritional, explains these seemingly strange associations for Jung. Now, he brings up the ambivalence of onanism. How does that fit into this discussion of libido and cultural development?
Right, that seems like a detour.
Well, Jung explains onanism as a regression to local sexual activity, rather than a displacement of libido towards external objects and relationships. In this sense, he argues, it cheats sexuality of its real purpose, hindering the development of culture by withdrawing dynamic forces that could otherwise contribute to it.
It's like all that energy gets contained and doesn't flow outward to create and connect. But he also acknowledges a psychological significance to onanism.
Yes, psychologically, onanism can be seen as a form of self-protection from fate, granting pleasure through fantasy without the need to engage with the often challenging external world. It's like Aladdin's lamp, he says, providing immediate gratification without the effort of conquering the world of one's desires.
It's a tempting shortcut, maybe, but perhaps one that ultimately limits growth and connection. Now, Jung questions our perception of human individuality compared to animals. That's an interesting angle.
Yeah, he suggests that our strong sense of extraordinary individuality might be somewhat of a delusion, based on our natural tendency to focus on differences for psychological adaptation.
We notice the differences more easily.
Right. We have a much harder time recognizing commonalities in our daily lives compared to when we observe things that are more remote or unfamiliar. It's like the closer we are to something, the more we focus on the small variations rather than the underlying similarities. Precisely. Jung argues that individual consciousness, with its focus on minute details, often obscures universally valid facts, making it a less ideal primary object for psychology, in his view.
So consciousness is about adapting to the specifics.
Yes. He defines the essence of consciousness as adaptation, contrasting it with the unconscious, which he sees as generally diffused, binding individuals to the race and connecting them to the psychology of past peoples.
So the unconscious holds the bigger picture, the shared human experience.
Exactly. Jung concludes that the unconscious, surpassing the individual in its generality, is the fundamental object of true psychology. Now, he discusses introversion and transference as normal reactions. How do these relate to our need for connection and our individual psyches?
Yeah, how are they normal?
Well, he notes the theological tendency to cling to the personal Jesus as a last vestige of a vanished divinity, reflecting a need for a tangible connection to the sacred.
Something concrete.
Right. The Roman Catholic Church's emphasis on the Pope as a visible figure meets this general human need for a relatable hero. Jung argues that this sensuous demonstrability of God supports introversion by facilitating transference. It's easier to direct love and veneration towards a human figure than a purely spiritual being.
So we project our own ideas and desires onto the divine, or onto human representatives.
Yes, Jung suggests that in loving God, humans are essentially loving their own projected ideas, which is akin to loving their unconscious, the shared inheritance of ancient humanity. This act of turning back to the mother of humanity, the spirit of the race, allows us to regain a sense of connection and the powerful feeling of belonging.
Like Antaeus touching the earth.
Exactly that myth. He concludes that temporary withdrawal into oneself, introversion, and the redirection of emotional energy, transference, are fundamental mechanisms, not just of psychoses, but also largely appropriate methods of normal reaction against inner conflicts.
Let's return to Miss Miller's visions. After prayer, she saw a sphinx with an Egyptian headdress. What's the significance Jung finds in this image?
Jung connects this vision to her earlier fantasy of the rigid Egyptian statue, linking it to early stages of hypnosis. The Sphinx, globally understood as a symbol of riddles, represents a puzzling creature embodying fate.
Right, the riddle of the Sphinx.
He interprets it as a semi-theriomorphic representation of the terrible mother archetype, drawing parallels to the Sphinx of Oedipus.
So this seemingly random image carries these deep mythological connotations, even if she wasn't consciously thinking of Oedipus.
Yes. While acknowledging the lack of subjective details from her, Jung turns to ethnographic material, assuming the modern unconscious coins symbols similarly to the ancient past. The Sphinx's half-human, half-animal form aligns with theriomorphic representations of the libido animalistic depictions of impulse found in dreams and fantasies.
Like the pig-crocodile dream.
Exactly. He provides that example of a patient's dream involving a half-pig, half-crocodile, illustrating this kind of mixed representation. Now, what about the seemingly bizarre connection of the mystical figure Chuantopel to the anal region? That sounds rather unexpected.
Yeah, that definitely stands out. How does he explain that?
Jung addresses this by explaining that the unconscious often brings forth long-lost infantile material first. To understand this, we need to consider a time when this infantile material was closer to the surface of consciousness.
Okay.
If a highly valued object is linked to the anus in the unconscious, Jung argues that it implies a high valuation was expressed in childhood, perhaps in a childish way.
It's like a childish, perhaps even crude way of expressing something important or valuable back then.
Precisely. He provides examples of the anal region being connected with veneration in different cultures and personal fantasies, highlighting the intimate connection between the seemingly worthless, like feces, and the highly valuable, like gold. He notes his own findings of similar patterns in religious valuations.
It's a reminder that the unconscious operates on a different logic than our conscious minds. Now, Jung mentions the Dioscuri and the Sacrificium Mithriacum. How do these relate to the hero archetype?
Jung sees the recurring motif of the Dioscuri, the mortal and immortal twins, representing the setting and rising sun as a projection of the hero's own dual nature.
Ah, the two sides.
Right. He describes the Sacrificium Mithriacum, the bull sacrifice, flanked by the two dataphors, Cos and Catopates, with their symbolic raised and lowered torches. He connects these figures to sepulchral erotes, symbolizing life and death, noting the similarity to the Christian crucifixion scene with the two thieves.
One going up, one going down.
Exactly, suggesting the idea of the mortal and immortal passing into Christian worship.
So these ancient myths and rituals shared these underlying themes of duality and transformation that resonate across different cultures and time periods. And he reiterates that the gods are essentially libido.
Yes. Comparison with the sun repeatedly teaches, in his view, that the gods are libido, that immortal part of us connected to the race, representing the life force that wells up from the depths of the unconscious, rooted in the whole of humanity.
And this might explain the ancient concept of a triune God. How does he connect that?
Jung argues that this triune figure, this Trili Ito, has its origins in phallic symbolism, with the male genitals serving as the basis for this trinity.
That's quite a direct interpretation.
It is. He even analyzes a late Babylonian bas-relief depicting an androgynous god with serpents and 3 stars as seemingly confirming this interpretation, noting the symbolic sexual suffixes in the image.
It's fascinating how these fundamental concepts in religion might have such primal biological roots, according to Jung. Now, Jung discusses rebirth through the mother. What are some of the mythological examples he uses?
He interprets the Indian fire-bringer, Matrisvan, being called the one swelling in the mother, and the ark or chest as symbols of the womb and rebirth, similar to the sun sinking into the sea.
Okay.
He connects this to the Augeas myth, where union with the mother leads to being exposed in a cask and reborn on a distant shore, representing the longing for rebirth through return to the mother's womb and immortality. A longing also expressed, he notes, in Holy Scriptures.
It's this recurring theme of death and rebirth, of returning to the source for renewal. Now he delves into the imagery of Babylon, the mother of harlots, and the heavenly bride from Revelation. What's the psychological interpretation here?
Jung analyzes the passage describing the woman on the scarlet beast, Babylon, as likely alluding to Rome and its temporal power, interpreting the waters she sits upon as representing the peoples and throngs under her dominion.
The worldly power.
Right. He contrasts this with the vision of the bride, the Lamb's wife, the holy Jerusalem descending from heaven. He suggests that this heavenly bride promised to the Son is, in fact, a purified and attained form of the mother.
The mother transformed.
Exactly. Highlighting the delicate psychologic perception, as he calls it, of church fathers in preserving this symbolic maternal significance within the Christ mystery.
So these biblical images also carry these deeper psychological layers related to the mother archetype. And he moves on to the symbolism of the waters of life and death.
Yes. He discusses the nymph of the spring and the presence of sacred springs in various cultures, seeing water as a symbol of life's origin and its return at death, the night journey on the sea.
The cycle.
He interprets the wish for the black water of death to become the water of life, and death's embrace to be the mother's womb as a manifestation of life's inherent resistance to death, echoing the Jonah motive again.
It's this constant cycle of creation and dissolution, with the maternal figure often associated with both beginnings and endings. Now, Jung analyzes ritual marriage and its connection to rejuvenation.
He examines the cult legend of the Samian Hera, where the image disappears, is found on the seashore in a Lagos tree and treated with wedding cake. He identifies this as a Eirgemus, a ritual marriage, linked to Zeus and Hera legends.
A sacred wedding.
Right. He connects the disappearance and hiding to the death and rebirth of the sun, concluding that another key aspect is the magic charm of rejuvenation condensed within this Hieroskemos.
So these ancient rituals weren't just about honoring deities, they were also about tapping into these deep-seated desires for renewal and rebirth. Now he delves into the etymology of the word enclosing and its surprising connections.
This is fascinating. He discusses the Indo-Germanic root veluvel, meaning encircling, surrounding, turning, and its derivations related to snakes, coiling, creeping plants, waves, and the womb.
All related.
Apparently. He notes the serpent's symbolism of rebirth due to shedding its skin. He connects the rudevel to meanings like fruitful field, sheath, and to undulate, as well as to sound, and even to will, to wish, directly linking it to libido.
That's incredible. So this single root word connects all these seemingly disparate ideas from the physical act of enclosing to the very essence of our desires. Now, Jung introduces the myth of Lilith and the terrible mother. This sounds like a darker aspect of the maternal figure.
Indeed. He presents the Talmudic tradition of Adam's demon wife Lilith before Eve, their conflict, and Lilith's transformation into a nightmare threatening children.
Like a boogeyman. Or woman.
Exactly. He draws a parallel to the Greek myth of Lamia, who was punished by Hera and became a child persecutor. This terrible mother motif recurs in fairy tales as a murderess or devourer.
Hansel and Gretel's witch.
A classic example. He connects Lamia to a voracious fish, linking it to Frobenius' whale dragon myth, where the sea monster devours the sun hero for rebirth, requiring the hero to use cunning to conquer it. This terrible mother embodies the mouth of death, a force to be overcome for renewal.
It's like the mother figure has this dual potential, life-giving and potentially destructive. Now, Jung discusses the horse as a symbol Freud and Jung both emphasized its significance, you said.
Yes. They highlighted the horse's connection to anxiety and the sexual meaning in writing fantasies. Jung explains why the maternal world ash Yggdrasil is called the frightful horse in German.
Interesting.
He cites Kannegieder's observation about rural beliefs connecting nightmares, often associated with mother goddesses, to horses riding at night.
So the horse can represent both our powerful drives and also the anxieties connected to them. Now, he brings in the Babylonian creation myth of Tiamat. How does this fit into the terrible mother theme?
He describes Tiamat, the mother Huber, creating monstrous beings to wage war against the gods in revenge for Apsu. Her creations are terrifying: giant snakes, lizards, scorpion men.
Primal chaos.
Exactly. The gods become anxious and ultimately oppose Marduk, the god of spring and the victorious sun. This is another powerful depiction of a primordial, powerful, and potentially destructive maternal figure who must be overcome to bring order.
It's a recurring narrative across cultures, this battle against a powerful, often maternal force in the creation of the world. Now, Jung discusses the mistletoe and religious incest. That sounds like a very complex and potentially controversial idea.
It is. He describes the fire mother, obtained from the parasitic mistletoe, noting its use as a remedy against barrenness and the druids' ritual cutting of it from the holy oak. He interprets this act as a religiously limited form of incest, where the mistletoe, the child, represents what man might have by the mother, leading to renewed life, which the incest prohibition forbids. The priest performs the act, while the hero god achieves immortality by overcoming the dragon, symbolizing the resistance against incest.
So the dragon is the taboo.
Or the fear associated with breaking it. The recurring motif of the tree with the snake in paradise reinforces this connection, with the dragon or serpent also representing the sexually neutral libido in opposition.
So these ancient rituals and myths are grappling with these fundamental taboos and desires around the mother fire. Now, he quotes Plato on the creation of the world's soul. What's the relevant insight here for Jung?
Jung quotes Plato describing the world's soul placed at the center of creation, a self-contained and blessed divine being free from desire. He interprets this highest state of inactivity and freedom as divine blessedness, with the child in the womb serving as the human prototype.
The ultimate state of being cared for.
Right. Diogenes inhabiting a tub becomes a mythological expression of this desireless state for Jung. He also references Plato's description of the world soul's bond to the world body.
It's this idea of a perfect, self-contained state, often linked back to the maternal origin. Now, Jung analyzes the lament of the earth for Christ. What's the significance of this?
He sees the earth lamenting Christ as the murderous mother of death, uniting with the mother of life in bringing forth a child. Mary kissing the cross symbolizes reconciliation and their union in lamenting the dying God.
A union of opposites.
Exactly. Jung notes that ancient Egyptian mythology, Isis, preserved this union of contrasting tendencies in the mother idea, symbolizing the son's libido for the mother and the conflict with incest resistance. He interprets the son's incestuous desire as projected cunning in the mother imago. Ultimately, the separation of the son from the mother signifies humanity's separation from the generic consciousness of animals and infantile archaic thought.
It's this ongoing push and pull between connection and individuation, symbolized by the relationship with the mother figure. Now let's go back to Miss Miller's visions. She saw a purple bay. What's the deeper meaning there?
Jung briefly connects the sea symbolism to what preceded. He notes the possibility of reminiscences of the Bay of Naples, but he emphasizes the significance of bay as something open, with etymological connections to opening the mouth, Latin sinus, and French gouffre, abyss.
Okay.
Crucially, it derives from Greek kopos, meaning bosom, womb, and vagina, revealing primitive underlying maternal ideas. He connects this to Goethe's imagery of Faust wishing to follow the sun to drink its eternal light.
So this seemingly simple image of a bay holds these profound primal associations with openness, receptivity, and the maternal source. Now let's delve further into the symbolism of horses. You mentioned they represent libido and anxiety, but there's more.
Yes. Horses also symbolize the wind. Libido is the shared element, as seen in the German legend of the wild huntsman pursuing the maiden. Place names derived from horses and centaurs often point to blind gods.
Okay.
Furthermore, horses signify fire and light, like Helios's fiery steeds, or Hector's horses, with names meaning bright, swift, shining, and burning. The mystic quadriga, 4 horses of the sun's chariot, in Dio Chrysostomus, represents the rotary fire of heaven, the planets, and the zodiac, their fiery interaction leading to dissolution and the charioteer becoming the strongest fire.
A whole cosmology in four horses.
Pretty much. They also represent the four elements, with the catastrophe symbolizing world conflagration and deluge, followed by divine unity. Astronomically, the quadriga can symbolize time, logically connected to fate being a fire symbol, thus time also exhibiting libido symbolism. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad further illustrates this pervasive symbolism by equating the sacrificial horse's body parts with cosmic elements in time.
It's like the horse acts as this multifaceted symbol connecting our inner drives to the forces of nature and even the cosmos itself. Now, Jung analyzes Cassius's irritability in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. What's the psychological insight there? Bit of literary criticism.
Sort of, but through a psychological lens. Jung interprets Cassius's outburst as theatrical and childishly hysterical, contrasting with Brutus's calm rebuke. He focuses on Brutus's lines about Cassius being yoked with a lamb and carrying anger like flint bears fire.
Quick to spark, quick to cool.
Right. Brutus's explanation of Cassius's rash humor, which my mother gave me, is seen by Jung as a plain revelation in analytic terms of the maternal origin of his irritability.
It's a surprisingly direct acknowledgement of how our temperament can be influenced by our maternal inheritance right there in Shakespeare. Now, Jung discusses the difficulty of sainthood and the constant presence of temptation.
He explains that striving for sainthood involves a violation of our natural impulses, which then defend themselves, making temptation a constant companion. He notes that these temptations can manifest unconsciously as physical symptoms like heart palpitations or hysterics replacing mental pain. He mentions the biographer of Emmerich correctly observing this projected pain.
So these intense spiritual struggles can have very real psychological and even physical manifestations. Now, Jung analyzes Nietzsche's poem where man is hunter, murderer, sacrificer, and sacrificial knife. What's the key takeaway?
Jung sees this poem as transforming apparent dualism into an internal soul conflict. He quotes the lines highlighting the self-inflicted nature of the hero's torment. Hunted by thyself, thine own prey, pierced through thyself.
Oof.
The deadly arrows, Jung concludes, strike from within.
It's this idea that our greatest struggles are often with ourselves, our own inner divisions. Now, Jung introduces the concept of enticing depths and their connection to the mother.
He speaks of a song lost and forgotten, a love song of childhood from the depths of the fairy well, representing both the mother and death. When libido withdraws from the conscious world, it sinks back to its source, the umbilicus associated with the mother.
The origin point.
Right. This moment of return, especially before a significant task, is dangerous, representing a decision point between annihilation and new life. If the libido remains trapped in this inner world, the individual becomes, as he puts it, a phantom in the outer world.
So this return to the maternal source can be both a source of strength and a potential trap. Now, he discusses willed introversion in a creative mind. How does that differ from problematic introversion?
Willed introversion in a creative individual is a conscious retreat to the source of life, mother, to gather strength for completing their work, a temporary mother-child play with oneself, akin to a narcissist state.
Okay, intentional.
Exactly. It's a necessary step for accessing inner resources, whereas prolonged introversion can lead to isolation. Jung mentions Nietzsche's among 100 mirrors in this context. He emphasizes that separation from the mother, though painful, is crucial for individual development.
It's a deliberate dipping back into the wellspring for nourishment, not getting stuck in it. And Jung suggests that poetic language has deep roots in primitive myth.
Absolutely. He asserts that Nietzsche's poetical figures of speech are often rooted in primitive myth, suggesting poets retain a subconscious awareness of long-past thought worlds. He quotes Hauptmann on poetic rendering, allowing the echo of the primitive word to resonate.
It's like poetry acts as a bridge to these ancient ways of understanding. Now, Jung discusses sacrifice and independence. What's the connection there?
He explains that the sacrifice, in this psychological context, means renouncing the mother, letting go of childhood bonds and limitations in adult life. He infers from hints about Miss Miller that she was likely still living within her family circle at an age where independence was crucial.
Still tied to home.
Yeah. He stresses the danger to mental health of prolonged infantile dependence, stating that life demands independence, and resisting this due to fear and indolence can lead to neurosis, which then becomes an excuse to avoid life's challenges.
So the willingness to sacrifice those early dependencies is essential for healthy adult development. Now, Jung analyzes the creation myth in Longfellow's Hiawatha. What does this reveal about creative strength?
He interprets the creation of the peace pipe, with the creator standing on the pipestone quarry and a river flowing from his footprints. phallic nature, horse symbolism. It's significant. The west wind's wooing of Winona with breath, spiritual fertilization, leads to Hiawatha's birth, star comet as libido symbol.
Okay.
Hiawatha's battle with Mondamin, god of maize at sunset, represents a fight for individual depths against the pull of the mother, yielding creative strength. Jung sees this as the source of all creation, requiring heroic courage to seize the treasure difficult to attain.
It's this struggle for individuation and the harnessing of inner resources that fuels creativity. Now, Jung delves into the Eleusinian mysteries and their subterranean marriage rituals. What's the symbolic meaning?
He quotes a passage describing the gloomiest descent and solemn communion in the Eleusinian mysteries, suggesting a ritual marriage celebrated subterraneously in Mother Earth. The priestess of Demeter represents the earth goddess.
Going underground.
Exactly. The descent into the earth, cave worship, symbolizes the mother's womb, a widespread concept seen in various ancient cults and myths, like Magi sacrificing, Mithrabarzans descending, Armenian cave worship, Cybele and Attis, even the Bethlehem cave potentially being an Attisite.
It's this symbolic return to the maternal depths for sacred union and renewal. Now, Jung revisits Hecate and the terrible mother archetype. What new insights does he offer?
He describes Empusa and Hecate with peculiar feet, theriomorphic phallic libido nature, and lists Hecate's symbols: key, whip, snake, dagger, torch. Her association with dogs links her to the mother of death and guardian of Hades.
Guardian of the underworld.
Right. As a spirit mother, she sends madness, domination by incest fantasy. The Cerberus mysteries involving a broken rod symbolize the sacred mother not to be touched. Jung identifies Hecate as nightmare, devourer, and bride of Corinth, embodying the magical power of the terrible mother, working from the unconscious, playing a significant role in Greek syncretism and being confused with Artemis.
So, Hecate embodies this potent, often feared aspect of the maternal unconscious, with connections to both life and death, sanity and madness. Now, Jung discusses the crevice in the earth as a symbol.
He explains that the crevice initially represents the kingdom of the mother of death, transitioning to the meaning of treasure house. He connects this to the etymology of hoard, treasure, related to Greek words for the innermost womb of the earth, Hades and cavity womb.
It's this idea of the depths holding both danger and potential riches, a return to the source yielding valuable insights. Now, Jung analyzes the snake again as a symbol of introversion and libido.
He interprets Miss Miller's dream of a woman with a snake encircling her and a patient's complaint of a snake stuck in her throat as symbolism of introversion libido turned inward. He refers to Nietzsche's vision of the shepherd and the snake as a vivid image of repressed thoughts or unconscious content.
Biting the snake's head off.
Right, that intense image. And Zarathustra's warning about swallowing gold, symbolizing the danger of internalizing too much value, leading to a painful reckoning.
So, the snake embodies this inward focus and the potential dangers of unacknowledged, unconscious content. Now, Jung discusses the serpent hero and the theme of sacrifice.
He explains the primitive identity of serpent and hero in myths like Cecrops, half snake, half man. He notes the casting of the god's skin as related to the hero's nature, paralleling Christ's death. He mentions other figures skinned as sacrifice, Marsyas, Scythian kings, symbolizing the revival of Earth's fertility. He interprets the Sabazios mysteries fragment about the bull and the dragon.
Bull of dragon.
And father of the bull is a dragon. Yes, as representing the cyclical nature of life and transformation, the dragon's power within seemingly different forms.
It's this recurring idea of transformation and renewal through sacrifice, with the serpent often playing a key role. Now, Jung interprets Wagner's Siegfried and Brunhilde in terms of the mother imago. How does that work?
He sees Brunhilde's awakening as revealing her pre-existence as Siegfried's wife-mother, the mother imago. Siegfried's question about his mother's fate, bound in sleep did she lie, and Brunhilde defining herself Siegfried's own, will illustrate this.
Thyself am I.
Exactly. Her words proclaiming love and conquering light symbolize the mystery of the logos entering the mother for rebirth.
It's this powerful connection between the hero and the maternal figure, representing the cyclical nature of the libido. Now, Jung interprets Chuantopil's monologue as the voice of the seeking soul.
He sees Chuantopil's sad monologue about searching for a soul who understands him as the voice of a brave individual seeking genuine connection in real life, with the unconscious offering this wise counsel to the dreamer. The details of the sod soul, pale skin, knowing sorrow, facing temptation, paint a picture of a kindred spirit.
Someone who truly gets it.
Right, suggesting the possibility of profound connection despite vast differences in time and origin.
It's this longing for understanding and connection that transcends time and individual experience. Now, Jung discusses the poison of retrospective longing. What does that mean exactly?
He explains how separation from the joy of childhood can drain nature of its glamour, leaving the future feeling empty, caused by a longing to sink back into the depths of the past.
Getting stuck looking backward.
Precisely. He analyzes Empedocles' poem about seeking life and being thrown into Etna's flames and the dissolving of pearls in wine as betraying this secret yearning for the maternal depths.
It's the danger of getting stuck in the past, preventing us from fully embracing the present and future. Now, Jung interprets death as a form of self-sacrifice for immortality. How?
He sees the connection from Asia through Patmos to Christian mysteries in Holderlin's poem as representing entering death and the afterlife as a self-sacrifice for attaining immortality. He explains the mysterious joy at the renewal of life after the sun has set, with wisdom connected to the depths of the mother.
It's this idea of transformation through loss, of finding new life in what seems like an ending. Now, Jung discusses cosmic sacrifice and the creation of the world. This sounds big.
It is. He proposes that if the world is fundamentally a thought with transcendental substance, then the sacrifice of regressive libido results in the creation of the world psychologically speaking. The world and starry sky, for one looking backward, represent the mother.
Okay.
The image of the world arises from renunciation of and longing for this idea, forming the basis of the cosmic sacrifice, exemplified by slaying the Babylonian primitive mother Tiamat. He finds the complete form of this thought in ancient Hindu philosophy, where Purusha is sacrificed to create the world, interpreting this as the great mystery of the mother sacrifice.
So the very act of creation is linked to this separation from the primordial maternal source. Now, Jung discusses the incest barrier and the birth of the world image, connecting back to Freud.
Yes. He explains that the world arises when humanity discovers it, which happens by sacrificing the mother, freeing oneself from the unconscious within the mother. Freud's incest barrier is the psychological force impelling this discovery, ending the longing for the food-giving mother and directing sexual libido towards its biological aim.
Right.
Freud's paradoxical statement about originally knowing only sexual objects refers to a subjective world image created from within outward, corrected by reality. The incest barrier forces sexual libido away from parental identification, leading to introversion and the potential for fantasies arising from this introverted libido.
It's this necessary breaking away from those early attachments that allows us to perceive and engage with the world as it is. Now, Jung discusses transformation into trees and its maternal meaning. We saw Attis before.
Right. He explains that the mythic transformation of Attis into a pine tree signifies burial in the mother, like Osiris overgrown by heather. The Attis bas-relief showing him growing from a tree represents a tree birth, connecting to the maternal meaning of being attached to the mother. Tree and image played a role in the Isis and Osiris and Persephone cults.
And Dionysus.
Dionysus is surnamed Dendrites in a tree, and the myth of Megaera planting the pine at his birth further illustrate this. The Pentheus myth, where Pentheus is torn apart after climbing a pine tree, highlights the terrible mother aspect and parallels the Pietà. The Attis feast and the self-mutilation of the Galloi symbolize sacrificial impulses also seen in Mithraic bull sacrifice.
So the tree becomes this powerful symbol of connection to the maternal, of both life and sacrifice. Now, Jung analyzes the serpent finally as an instrument of sacrifice and regression.
He explains the infantile personality's struggle against necessities and creation of self-imposed coercions. The serpent is a well-illustrated instrument of sacrifice, St. Sylvester of Philoctetes, also representing coitus and the act of creeping into the mother's womb.
Dual meaning again.
Yes. The horts, positive libido, renewal, and serpent, fear of death, opposition, symbolize libido's internal conflict, forward and backward striving. Ultimately, libido, like the sun, wills both creation and destruction, and resistance to these impulses can mask the underlying will.
Wow, we've journeyed through so much in this deep dive into Jung's early perspectives. I mean, we've explored the hidden world of the unconscious, the powerful driving force of the libido, the contrast between our deliberate, logical thinking and our more imaginative, dreamlike thoughts, and, well, the profound connections between ancient myths and our deepest psychological patterns. We've also traced how recurring symbols like the serpent, the horse, and the sun weave their way through both our individual and our shared unconscious.
And what's truly remarkable, I think, is how interconnected these ideas are. They offer us a richer, maybe more nuanced understanding of not just our individual inner lives, but also the historical roots of our beliefs and behaviors as a species.
So as you go about your day, maybe consider this. How might these ancient themes of creation, destruction, and your relationship with the mother, whether that's, your literal mother, the natural world around you, or even your own inner depths, how might they still be playing out in your life and in the wider culture? What dragons might you be facing, and what potential rebirths could be on the horizon?
That's a great question to ponder. And for those whose curiosity has been ignited by these foundational concepts, we definitely encourage you to delve further into the writings of Jung, the vast and, well, compelling field of depth psychology.
Absolutely.
There are always more layers to uncover in this incredible exploration of the human mind.